His name was Brendan Hughes. He was 24 years old, and he was waiting. The date was October 2nd, 1972. The morning was overcast, the kind of flat grey light that settles over West Belfast in autumn and does not lift. Hughes stood on a corner in the lower falls, and from where he stood he couldn't see any of the 3 things he had ordered. That was the point. 2 miles to the west, a green van marked 4 Square was on its scheduled route through the Twinbrook housing estate, collecting laundry bags from doorsteps, as it had done twice a week for the better part of 14 months. The man at the wheel was Sapper Telford Stuart, 20 years old, a Royal Engineers soldier from Strabane in County Tyrone, wearing a civilian shirt and jacket. The Lance Corporal from the Women's Royal Army Corps, who knocked at front doors and chatted with housewives, had been making the same rounds for over a year, building the routines of ordinary commerce into a neighbourhood that had no particular reason to distrust a laundry collection service. Neither of them wore a uniform. The van said 4 Square on its side in white lettering. It wasn't a laundry. It was a British Army intelligence operation, one of 3 running simultaneously across a 6-mile stretch of the same city. 4 miles to the northeast, on the Antrim Road in North Belfast, a massage parlour called the Gemini Health Studios was open for business. That, too, was the military reaction force. 1 mile to the south, on College Square East in central Belfast, an MRF administrative office sat unremarkable between its neighbouring buildings, another face among commercial facades. 3 locations, 3 fronts. All 3 had been compromised by the same counterintelligence cell. According to Hughes's later recorded testimony, all 3 were planned to come down within the same operational window on the same morning, before any one front could reach the others with a warning. The man who gave that order was Brendan Hughes. The history of October 2nd, 1972 is most often told as the day the IRA ambushed a British laundry van. That version accounts for 1 of 3 targets, and none of the architecture that connected them. The military reaction force was formed in Belfast in the summer of 1971. It was placed under Headquarters Northern Ireland and operated within 39 Air Portable Brigade, then commanded by Brigadier Frank Kitson, the officer whose 1971 book, Low Intensity Operations, drawn from counter-insurgency campaigns in Kenya and Malaya, had codified the use of turned insurgents, civilian commercial fronts, and intelligence-gathering pseudo-operations as formal British doctrine. In Belfast, that doctrine was given a budget, a base at Palace Barracks in Holywood, County Down, and approximately 40 soldiers drawn from various regiments. Its members operated in civilian clothes, drove civilian vehicles, and existed entirely outside the uniformed presence that defined British Army life on the streets. They ran turned IRA volunteers, known inside the MRF as Freds, as agents within Republican organisations, and they established commercial front companies in nationalist areas to generate intelligence that uniformed patrols could never reach. No formal founding document for the MRF has ever been released. Historians who have traced the unit's paper trail have found the records deliberately destroyed. What survives is the operational record, assembled from court proceedings, declassified minutes, and the accounts of participants on both sides. The 3 fronts that Hughes's cell targeted on October 2nd weren't the MRF's only activities. The unit had also been involved in a series of plainclothes shooting incidents in nationalist areas of Belfast through 1972. Incidents that drew public attention to the unit's existence and put additional pressure on it from within the Republican intelligence apparatus. But the civilian front network was the MRF's most technically sophisticated contribution, and the Four-Square Laundry, operational since at least summer 1971, was its centrepiece. During its operational period, the Four-Square Laundry was credited in at least one institutional account with more than 30% of intelligence-led provisional IRA arrests in the Andersonstown area of West Belfast. Running twice weekly, collecting clothes, building a forensic map of the estates street by street. Brendan Hughes was born in June 1948 on Blackwater Street off the Grosvenor Road, the Lower Falls, West Belfast. Second of 6 children. His father was a builder's labourer. The family rented. The street was the kind that most of Belfast's Catholic nationalist working class occupied in the post-war years. Terraced, close, heated by coal fires in a room that doubled as a kitchen and a sitting room, with the toilet outside in the yard, shared with neighbours in the way that houses built without indoor plumbing required. Gas lampposts on some streets, still. Standpipes rather than reliable indoor water in the older stock. Hughes attended St Comgall's School on the Falls Road and left at 15, which was ordinary. What he did next wasn't. He trained at the National Nautical School in Sheerness, Kent, around the age of 16, and joined the British Merchant Navy around 1967 on British-flagged vessels, serving approximately 2 years. The ports of call included South Africa, Mozambique, and the Middle East. Biographical accounts note that what he encountered in those ports, colonial poverty, racial stratification, the practical daily mechanics of empire at work in harbour warehouses and dockyards, deepened a political awareness already forming from the conditions of his own neighbourhood. He came back to Belfast before the summer of 1969 resolved anything for anyone. August 1969 ended whatever ambiguity remained. On the night of 14 to 15th August, loyalist mobs moved through the Catholic streets of the Lower Falls. Bombay Street, a terrace of 65 houses, was set alight on the 15th. 44 of those houses were destroyed. Some burned with the furniture still inside. Families stood in the street with whatever they'd been able to carry out in the minutes they had. Over 1,500 Catholic families were driven from their homes across Belfast in those days. Hughes was in the Lower Falls during the attacks, part of the community defence that formed almost spontaneously as the fires went up. A human perimeter around the streets that were still standing. His older cousin, Charles Hughes, commanded D Company, 2nd Battalion of the Belfast Brigade, under the existing IRA structure. Brendan joined the organisation in 1969, aligned with the Provisional faction when the IRA fractured at its December 1969 convention and moved quickly through D Company's internal hierarchy: training officer, then quartermaster, then adjutant. D Company, known internally as the Dogs, operated in the Lower Falls, in streets where the distances between front doors and army observation posts were sometimes measured in yards. The area, as biographical accounts of the period describe it, was nearly ideal for the tempo of urban guerrilla activity. Dense housing, interlocking back entries, a community that had spent months developing the alertness that sustained operations required. Hughes described the operational rhythm of that period on tape, years later, with the flat exactness of a man recounting a workday. A bank robbery in the morning to raise funds, an afternoon float in a car looking for targets of opportunity, a bomb and a booby trap placed in the evening, then perhaps a gun battle or two before midnight. He gave no particular weight to any of it in the recounting. The facts carry the weight for him. On the 8th of March 1971, official IRA volunteers shot Charles Hughes dead at Lesson Street in the Lower Falls as he was leaving his house. It was IRA interfactional violence, the feud between the provisionals and the officials that had been building since the split and briefly became lethal. Brendan succeeded him as OC Company. By the summer of 1972, he had moved up to battalion and then brigade level. On the 21st of July 1972, Bloody Friday, he was the operational commander of the coordinated bomb campaign that placed 22 devices across Belfast, killing 9 people and wounding 130. He said on tape years later that he could hear something had gone wrong as the bombs started going off, too many of them, and that he understood what he was hearing. He said he carried regret for it. He said if he could do it over again, he wouldn't. That is his voice on embargoed record, offered without ceremony. By October 2nd, 1972, he was operating at Senior Belfast Brigade Command level. The exact formal designation he held on that specific date isn't established in available documents with the precision that would close the question. By mid-1972, he had moved well beyond the D Company OC role into broader operational authority. What isn't in dispute is the command function on that morning. He was the man who gave the order. To understand why the order had to cover all 3 targets at once, the forensic mechanism of the 4-square laundry needs to be understood in full. The green van arrived at the estate on its scheduled day. Tuesday and Friday were typical, the same reliable pattern a genuine service would establish, and pulled into the rows of terraced houses. Sapper Stuart drove. Lance Corporal Walk worked the doorsteps, carrying the canvas laundry bags, handling the paperwork, talking to the women who answered. Most of them were home during the day. Husbands at work, children at school or at the entries. She had a manner for it, the right tone for a service worker who called frequently enough to become familiar without becoming intrusive. Residents handed over bags of household laundry, shirts, work trousers, children's clothes, bedding. She noted the address, logged the collection, made the small talk of somebody who had been doing this job long enough to know which neighbours had what to say about which others. The clothes weren't examined inside the van. This is a detail that matters. The van wasn't a mobile forensic laboratory. It was a collection vehicle. The garments were transported from the van to a separate forensic facility, a contracted laboratory or dedicated analysis space, where they were tested before washing for explosive residues, gunpowder traces, gun oil, and blood. The forensic examination came first. After it, the clothes were laundered by a contracted legitimate laundry company and returned to customers. The bag came back to the right door. The shirts were clean. The socks were folded. The deception completed itself at delivery. That was the surface operation. The second layer was slower and more methodical, and in some ways more dangerous to anyone sheltering in the estates. Each address was profiled. Each collection logged, not just by quantity, but by content. The size ranges present in each household's load, the type of garments, whether they changed week on week. The records were compared. A household where the previous 13 collections had contained women's clothing and children's sizes, where the household composition was known or inferable, a widow, a single mother, a woman whose husband was in prison, and where a new collection suddenly included a man's work shirt in a size that matched none of the declared occupants. That was the signal. Not proof of anything, a flag. The address went onto a watch list, and from there, more targeted surveillance could establish what the laundry had suggested. The intelligence didn't prosecute anyone. It pointed at doors. The concealed roof compartment added a third function. A false ceiling had been built into the van's cargo area, and soldiers lay prone inside it, cameras in hand, positioned at concealed apertures, photographing suspects, vehicles and houses as the van moved its twice-weekly route through the estates. Every address on the collection schedule was also an observation point. Every street the van turned into was a photographic sweep at close quarters, conducted by men invisible inside a vehicle that the neighbourhood had accepted as entirely ordinary. Lance Corporal Walk's role was more intimate than either of the other two. She was in the houses, she chatted, she saw the interiors. A service worker who had been welcomed into domestic spaces for over a year, building the kind of familiarity that a uniformed soldier couldn't have purchased at any price. She was later awarded the Military Medal, the first Women's Royal Army Corps member to receive that decoration for undercover operations of this kind. The award dated approximately September 1973. By then, she had already survived the morning when everything else ended. In early 1972, British Army intelligence was running 2 provisional IRA members from the 2nd Belfast Battalion as agents. One was Kevin McKee, 17 years old, from the Ballymurphy area, previously active in Nafiana, the Republican Youth Wing. A King's Own Scottish Borderers Watchkeeper's log from February 1972 records an IRA arms dump raid facilitated by intelligence McKee had supplied, the British Army's own contemporaneous record of his active informer role. The other was Seamus Wright, 25 years old, an asphalt layer from West Belfast, a volunteer in the same battalion structure, married. Documented by the MOD in May 1973 minutes, prepared in connection with the trial of MRF soldier Sergeant Clive Williams for the killing of civilian Patrick McVeigh as a turned terrorist. That language is the Ministry of Defence's own, produced in a court context and partially released after subsequent litigation. By September 1972, the IRA's Belfast Brigade counterintelligence operation had begun to take an interest in both men. The process wasn't dramatic in its early stages. Repeated failure to appear for IRA duty was the indicator. Each missed call, each unexplained absence, accumulating until the pattern became diagnostic. In the IRA's internal logic, a volunteer who had been arrested and subsequently missed duty without a convincing explanation had, very likely, been turned. The suspicion once formed was acted on. Under interrogation, one or both men confessed. Wright's debriefing produced intelligence on MRF personnel and identified the four-square mobile laundry van, its routes, its cover function, its schedule, as a British Army intelligence collection operation. McKee's role was established. Internal MOD intelligence files, surfaced through paper trail research conducted decades later, noted that McKee may have been personally involved in the murder of Sapper Stuart on 2nd October. A detail from British intelligence's own subsequent reconstruction that suggests McKee's knowledge of the van's operation was granular. Available primary sources don't establish whether Wright's interrogation produced a single simultaneous disclosure of all 3 October 2nd target locations: the laundry, the Antrim Road operation, and the College Square East office, or whether Hughes's cell assembled that intelligence picture from multiple sources over the preceding weeks. The research record describes piecemeal intelligence disclosure, not a single definitive map handed over in one session. What is established is that by the first days of October, the cell possessed a sufficiently complete picture of the MRF's civilian front network to plan coordinated action against all 3 nodes, and that the decision to strike all 3 simultaneously on the same morning was a choice, not the consequence of only knowing about one. The operational logic of simultaneity is straightforward. A single node strike alerts the others. One front destroyed early on a Tuesday morning produces a warning call before midday. Personnel relocate, schedules change. The other nodes go dark. By striking 3 fronts at the same moment, before any node can contact the others, the entire system is removed in a single operation with no time for the network to respond. The IRA's own account frames all 3 strikes as falling within a single compressed operational window that morning. The exact duration isn't fixed in the documentary record, but the operational logic that required that compression is clear from the structure of the plan itself. The intelligence advantage that had taken 14 months to build couldn't be reconstructed if the architecture was gone. Wright and McKee were abducted in October 1972, shot in the head and buried in a single shallow grave in bogland at Cogglestown in County Meath. The IRA didn't acknowledge their deaths publicly for decades. In 1999, as part of a broader statement concerning 9 of the disappeared, the organisation acknowledged responsibility. Their remains were located in June 2015 by the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, following DNA analysis. Kevin McKee was 17 years old at death. Seamus Wright was 25. An inquest returned a verdict of unlawful killing for both. October 2nd, 1972. Approximately 11:15 in the morning. Juniper Park, a cul-de-sac on the Twinbrook estate in West Belfast. The green van was on its route. Stuart was at the wheel. Walk was at a doorstep nearby, bag in hand, mid-conversation with a woman at the door. The van had turned into the cul-de-sac in the ordinary way a service vehicle turns into a residential dead end. No acceleration, no hesitation, the movement of something that belonged there. IRA gunmen opened fire on the driver's side. The firing was directed at the van from multiple angles. Stuart was shot at the wheel and killed instantly, according to the Military Intelligence Museum account. The van stopped. Walk heard the shots and ran. Into the house she had been standing outside of, past the woman at the door, through the door and into the interior, telling whoever was there that loyalist gunmen were firing outside. The most plausible thing she could say in those seconds, the cover story that bought her the time she needed. She stayed inside until plainclothes RUC officers came for her. She left the street alive. The van didn't move again. The roof compartment, the concealed space built into the van's cargo area, the prone position where soldiers had lain with cameras on the drives through the estates, was present in the vehicle that morning. Anne Foblacht, the provisional IRA newspaper, subsequently reported that in addition to the driver, 2 British intelligence officers concealed in the roof compartment were killed when the van was machine-gunned from side and rear, and that the total October 2nd operation accounted for 5 British personnel across all 3 locations. British official records, military casualty databases, and the Northern Ireland High Court proceedings related to the subsequent judicial review brought by Stuart's family confirm 1 fatality at Twinbrook. Sapper Telford Stuart, Corps of Royal Engineers, killed at the wheel, age 20, from Strabane. British-aligned accounts, including the Military Intelligence Museum's institutional record, explicitly state that Stuart and Walk were the only personnel in the van and that no soldiers were killed in the roof compartment. Whether operators were inside that compartment on the specific morning of October 2nd and whether any were killed isn't confirmed by the British state. The compartment structurally existed. What happened inside it that morning remains unresolved in the available primary record, where the IRA's account and the British institutional record don't converge. Stuart's family didn't accept the official silence that surrounded his death for decades. They eventually launched judicial review proceedings against the British Army. A 2022 Northern Ireland High Court judgment addressed the case, confirming Stuart's undercover role and the circumstances of his death at Twinbrook. The BBC reported on the family's legal challenge in 2016, more than 40 years after the morning they lost him. He was 20 years old. 4 miles to the northeast, the Gemini Health Studios on Antrim Road was raided that same morning. The Gemini Studios was a massage parlour, MRF connected, included in the civilian front network alongside the laundry operation. Anne Foblacht reported 2 MRF members killed there. British casualty records don't confirm those deaths. What is confirmed across independent sources, including the peer-reviewed Tand Fonline study on professionalising clandestine British military intelligence in Northern Ireland, which addresses the October 2nd events directly, is that the Gemini Studios was an MRF-linked civilian front, and that it was struck that morning as part of the same coordinated operation. The academic source states explicitly that on the 2nd of October 1972, the IRA struck 2 other suspected MRF operations on the same day as the laundry ambush. The nature of the Gemini Studios' intelligence-gathering methodology is described in available sources as a massage parlour operation, with later accounts characterising it as a honey trap front, a facility where targets from the Republican community could be cultivated socially and where conversations and relationships could generate intelligence unavailable through other means. The specific mechanics of how information was elicited and by whom aren't documented in the primary sources with the same granularity that the laundry operation is. What is established is that it sat on Antrim Road in North Belfast, that it was an MRF front, and that it was hit the same morning Sapper Stuart died 4 miles to the southwest. 1 mile south of Hughes's position on the Falls Road, on College Square East in central Belfast, the MRF office was the 3rd target. An IRA unit struck it that morning. Multiple sources confirm this. The same peer-reviewed academic source, Anne Foblacht accounts, and multiple secondary histories of the MRF period all place a 3rd simultaneous attack at College Square East. The specific details of the College Square East attack, the unit involved, the exact method, the operational outcome beyond the fact of the strike, aren't documented in the available primary record with the specificity of the Twinbrook ambush. The British state hasn't publicly confirmed the casualties or circumstances of the College Square East incident with the same degree of institutional record that eventually surrounded Stuart's death. 3 fronts struck on the same morning. Twinbrook, 2 miles west, Antrim Road, 4 miles northeast, College Square East, 1 mile south. A geometric spread across approximately 6 miles of city. The distances are consistent with Belfast's street layout, the targets confirmed across multiple independent sources, the same morning timing established in the peer-reviewed academic record. The Falls Road and its surrounding estates were, in many respects, designed by circumstance to accept the intelligence architecture the MRF had constructed. The terraced streets of Andersonstown, Ballymurphy, Turf Lodge and Twinbrook in 1972 were working-class Catholic neighbourhoods without the domestic infrastructure that had reached other parts of Belfast. Coal fires for heat, outdoor toilets for many families, gas lamps on some streets still in use around 1970. Very few households with washing machines of their own. Shared standpipes in older housing stock. The rhythm of domestic life built around communal facilities and shared resources in a way that the more prosperous ends of the city had already moved past. A cut-price laundry collection service wasn't a suspicious thing on those streets. It was a practical and welcome one. The MRF's planners had read the material conditions of the community they needed to penetrate and designed a cover that fitted them exactly. But the same conditions that made the cover plausible also created the intelligence ecology that made it vulnerable. The nationalist estates were tight-knit in the way that proximity and poverty produce. Neighbours who had lived beside each other for decades, who knew each other's household compositions with the granular intimacy of people who used the same standpipe and shared the same back entry. Who was widowed, who had adult sons at home and who didn't, whose husband had been interned and whose was still in the house. When a laundry van began serving an area where this kind of knowledge was ambient and detailed, every household on its collection route was also a household inside a web of observation that the van's operators didn't control and couldn't account for. The anomalies the MRF was looking for in the laundry data, the wrong-sized clothing at the wrong address, were the same kind of anomalies that neighbours had already noticed and filed away. A community that had spent years developing alertness to incongruity, to the person who didn't quite fit, to the vehicle that came slightly too regularly, that community's attention was a form of intelligence in its own right. The ecology that made the laundry commercially plausible also made it penetrable once an insider began talking. Wright had talked. The intelligence picture was assembled across the preceding weeks. The order went out before dawn on October 2nd. During his lifetime, Brendan Hughes didn't put the full account in the public record. British official documentation treated the three events of that morning as separate incidents, categorised differently, none fully explained as a coordinated operation. The MRF's own records had been deliberately destroyed, a fact noted explicitly by historians who have tried to reconstruct the archive from surviving fragments. The IRA's public statements gave the laundry attack the most detail, for reasons that were partly propaganda and partly the operational logic of claiming the most visible outcome. The coordinated nature of what happened that morning, the counterintelligence architecture behind it, Hughes's commanding role in planning and ordering it, all of this remained scattered across sources that didn't cohere into one picture, by design, on both sides. Hughes preserved the complete version on tape. Between 2001 and 2002, he recorded oral history interviews with Anthony McIntyre in a Belfast location. McIntyre was a former IRA prisoner who had become the lead researcher for the Boston College Belfast project, a testimony archive for conflict participants on both the Republican and Loyalist sides, run through Boston College's Burns Library in Massachusetts. The project was conceived as a way to capture accounts that the participants wouldn't give while they were still subject to the legal and personal consequences of what they described. The terms were explicit from the beginning. Recordings embargoed until the contributor's death, sealed from public access in the interim. Contributors understood they were speaking to a record that wouldn't be heard until they were gone. That was the guarantee the project ran on. McIntyre recalled Hughes saying on the recordings that the reason he was doing the interviews was because of his trust in McIntyre. He was in his early 50s when he sat for the interviews. He had spent the early years of the 21st century becoming increasingly public in his disillusionment with the direction the Sinn Féin leadership had taken the movement. The accommodations, he believed, had betrayed the working-class Republican constituency he had spent his life in. He wasn't a man at peace with the outcome of the conflict. He chose the oral history archive as the form that would preserve his account of it without releasing it while he was alive to bear the consequences of what it contained. He was hospitalized in early February 2008 with a chest infection and influenza. The infection progressed. He fell into a coma. He died on the 16th of February 2008 in Belfast City Hospital, aged 59. He had undergone heart surgery at some point before the final hospitalization, and his condition had continued to deteriorate through his late 50s. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were divided across 3 locations: his parents' grave, the ruins of his grandfather's home in the Cooley Mountains in County Louth, and the D Company Garden of Remembrance on the Falls Road. Not the provisional IRA plot in Milltown Cemetery. An IRA volley of shots was fired over his remains. A memorial stone seat was erected near the D Company Garden in February 2011 and smashed in a sledgehammer attack by unknown parties shortly after. It was later rebuilt. When Hughes died, the embargo on his recordings lifted automatically under the terms he had agreed with Boston College. Ed Maloney, the Irish journalist who had served as director of the Belfast project, published the recordings in 2010 as Voices from the Grave: Two Men's War in Ireland, released by Faber and Faber in London. The book reconstructed Hughes's IRA career through his own recorded testimony, incorporating his account of the MRF operation, among many others. The coordinated nature of October 2nd, 3 fronts, 1 cell, 1 operational order, entered the public record for the first time through that publication. For 38 years, what Hughes knew and what the official record held were two different things. The first was whole. The second was fragmented by design. The tapes contained other disclosures. Hughes named Gerry Adams as having ordered the 1972 abduction and murder of Jean McConville, a widowed mother of 10 taken from her home in Divis Flats by the IRA in December of that year. Adams has consistently and completely denied any involvement in McConville's death and stated publicly that Hughes had been lying. In May 2014, Adams was arrested by the Police Service of Northern Ireland in connection with the McConville murder investigation. He was held for 4 days of questioning and released without charge. That is the documented legal outcome. Hughes's recorded claim, Adams's complete denial, an arrest, and a release without charge. The tapes themselves became the subject of a separate legal struggle that ran for several years. Beginning in 2011, the Police Service of Northern Ireland issued treaty requests, resulting in American federal court subpoenas directed at Boston College for the Belfast project recordings, in connection with the McConville investigation. Protracted litigation followed in Massachusetts Federal Court and in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. The First Circuit ultimately upheld disclosure of a limited number of recordings. The Belfast Project's model, oral history under embargo, protected by a university's institutional promises, had not been constructed to survive contact with treaty-based subpoena law, and the proceedings made that gap permanently visible. The MRF was wound up in 1973, approximately 18 months after its formation. The precise month isn't available in public records. BBC Panorama and academic sources both place the disbandment that year without pinning the date more closely. The November 1972 Ministry of Defence review, ordered in the aftermath of the October attacks, is documented in historical accounts of the period as the institutional mechanism through which the decision to replace the MRF was processed. The successor unit, known formally as the Special Reconnaissance Unit and internally as 14 Intelligence Company, was deployed to Northern Ireland from late 1972, trained by 22 SAS, and numbered approximately 120 to 130 personnel under direct Headquarters Northern Ireland Command. A top-secret briefing prepared for Prime Minister Harold Wilson in April 1974 named the unit and described the transition from the MRF as a move towards centralised control and significantly higher training standards. What came after the MRF operated on different principles. The peer-reviewed Tand von Lein study on professionalising clandestine military intelligence in Northern Ireland is direct on the point. After October 2, 1972, it was clearly time for a different approach. The civilian front methodology, commercial covers, laundry rounds, massage parlour fronts, office facades embedded in ordinary streets, didn't characterise 14 intelligence companies' approach in the way it had the MRF. Available primary sources don't document a formally written prohibition on civilian commercial fronts as an explicit standing order for the successor unit. What the sources document is the institutional shift in approach that followed the events of October 2nd, a shift that looks, in practice, like an ending. The method retired with the unit that had practiced it, and the unit that replaced it was built on different foundations. The most sophisticated application of civilian front counterinsurgency doctrine Britain had deployed in Northern Ireland lasted 14 months. It had reached into the laundry bags of West Belfast, into the household composition of estates where it had no right to be, and built a 30% contribution to intelligence-led arrests in Andersonstown through the domestic routines of families who thought they were using a cut-price laundry service. A 24-year-old officer and the cell operating under him, working across 6 miles of one city, acting on intelligence gathered from turned volunteers, brought it down in a single morning. The MRF was finished. Its successor came under tighter command, higher training standards, and different operational doctrine. Kitson's commercial cover methodology, translated into Belfast's streets, didn't outlive the autumn of 1972. Brendan Hughes, the merchant seaman from the Lower Falls who had served on British-flagged ships before becoming one of the most effective operators working against British military intelligence in Belfast, held the full picture to himself for 36 years. He put it on embargoed tape reels, recorded in a Belfast backroom with a researcher who had himself once been a provisional IRA prisoner, and who understood, without needing it explained, why the embargo had to hold. Hughes chose the form of testimony that would preserve what he knew without releasing it to a world where what he knew would matter while he was still alive to be affected by it. He died on the 16th of February 2008 in Belfast City Hospital. The embargo lifted. Ed Maloney published in 2010. The voice from the grave named what the official record had left fragmented. 3 fronts, 1 cell, 1 morning, 1 officer. The 4-square laundry is the famous part of the story. It was 1 node of 3. The system is what fell. If you want more history told at this level of specificity, subscribing keeps these investigations coming.